There are things families decide together, and there are things one person decides, alone, in a moment nobody else was present for, and then spends the rest of their life making everyone else live inside. The second kind is harder to survive, not because the thing itself is always terrible, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just a choice, made by a person under pressure, that rippled forward through years and bedrooms and dinner tables and holiday photographs until it finally hit something solid enough to stop it. I was the solid thing. My name is Cara Sinclair. I am 22 years old. For the first 19 years of my life, I was told I was an accident. Not cruelly, not always in those words, but consistently, in the way that families communicate the things they don't want to say directly. A look between adults when I asked too many questions. A pause before certain answers. The gentle, practiced phrase my mother used whenever the subject came anywhere close. We weren't planning on you, sweetheart, but you were the best surprise we ever had. I believed it because I had nothing to compare it to. Then my grandmother got sick, and a woman I had never met drove 4 hours to sit at her bedside, and everything I thought I was became something else entirely. Before I take you there, hit like and subscribe. It matters more than you know. Drop your city and your time in the comments. I read every single one, and I'll be reading tonight. Let me take you back to the beginning. Or what I thought was the beginning. Part 1. The story I was given. My parents were Carol and Dennis Sinclair. They married in 1998 in a small ceremony in eastern Ohio. The kind of wedding with a church hall and a DJ who also did bar mitzvahs and a cake that leaned slightly to the left in every photograph. My mother wore her aunt's dress, altered. My father wore a rented tuxedo and cried during the vows, which everyone remembered and told me about more than once, because it was the most emotional anyone had ever seen. Dennis Sinclair, and it had the quality of a legend. They were 24. They had a one-bedroom apartment in Youngstown and a shared car and two incomes that covered the bills if nothing unexpected happened. Nothing unexpected happened for a while. I arrived in 2002. The one-bedroom became a two-bedroom. The shared car became two separate cars, one of which required a specific combination of jiggling the key and saying something under your breath to get the engine to turn. My father got a promotion. My mother went part-time, the usual reorganization of a life around a new person. What I was told, they hadn't been trying. It was a surprise. A good one. The best one. What I felt, growing up, believed. Completely. I had no reason not to. My parents were not cold people. My father coached my soccer team badly and enthusiastically for 4 years. My mother read to me every night until I started reading faster than she did, and we switched to taking turns. We ate dinner together on weeknights. We drove to my grandparents' house every Thanksgiving and Christmas, 6 hours each way, with a cooler of snacks and a playlist my father controlled, and my mother edited in real time. My grandparents. That's where I need to slow down. My mother's parents were Walter and June Alderman. They lived in a brick ranch house outside Columbus, Ohio, on a street of brick ranch houses that all looked like they had been built in the same week in 1971 and had been quietly competing with each other ever since. Walter was retired from the post office. June had been an elementary school teacher. She had the posture of someone who had spent 30 years standing in front of children and the patience of someone who had survived it. June was my person, the way certain people are. Not because she was perfect, because she was consistent. She called me every Sunday. She remembered every small thing I told her. She sent birthday cards that arrived exactly on the day, never the day before, never the day after, which I did not appreciate as remarkable until I was old enough to understand what kind of attention that requires. She had a particular way of looking at me sometimes. Steady, long, the way you look at something you love, that you are also worried about. I noticed it from an early age. I thought it meant she was protective. Grandmothers are protective. That wasn't what it meant. I didn't know what it meant until I was 19 and she was lying in a hospital bed in Columbus with her hands folded on the blanket, and a stranger was sitting in the chair beside her holding June's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. Part 2. What normal looked like. I want to give you the texture of my childhood before I dismantle it, because it matters. It was not a bad childhood. I need to say that clearly. My parents loved me. The house was warm. There was food and there were books, and there was a dog named Biscuit who lived to 14 and died peacefully under the dining room table one Thursday morning, like he had chosen the location with care. What there was also, underneath the warmth, was something I can only describe as a managed quality. Like a room where the furniture has been arranged very deliberately. Everything in its place. Nothing moved. No one suggests rearranging because rearranging would require explaining why everything was where it was in the first place. My father's family never came up much. His parents had both died before I was born. He had a brother in Seattle he talked to twice a year and saw less than that. He said they had grown apart. I accepted it. Families grow apart. That's a thing that happens. My mother's family was the active one. The Aldermans, the cousins, the aunts and uncles who gathered at Walter and June's house every holiday and had opinions about everything and talked over each other at dinner and laughed loudly and knew every family story by heart. Every family, sir, Ed family keeper. I noticed it the way you notice a word that's always used in a particular way, and then one day you realize you've never heard it used any other way. And you don't know if that's because it has no other use, or because everyone around you has agreed, quietly, to use it only the one way. My mother had a sister. Her name was Patricia. She was 3 years younger than my mother. She had moved to Portland, Oregon, when I was a baby and was the designated absent one, the one who sent checks instead of coming to Christmas, the one whose name appeared in conversation with a particular practiced neutrality. Every family has one, the one who left. The one the others have made a story about that allows them to stay. I asked about Patricia when I was about 10. My mother said they didn't talk much, said Patricia had made her choices, said some families just go in different directions. June, when I once asked her directly, looked at me with that steady worried look and said, "Patricia is doing fine, sweetheart. Some things are complicated. Some things are complicated." I filed it. I was 10. I had other things to think about. Part 3. The phone call. I was a sophomore in college when June had her first stroke. Minor, they said. More a warning than a catastrophe. She recovered most of what she'd lost within a few weeks. Walter called me the morning it happened, because he always called me directly, not through my mother, which I understood even then as a particular kind of respect. He said, "Your grandmother is in the hospital. She's going to be all right. I wanted you to hear it from me." I said, "I'm coming." He said, "Finish your week. She'll still be here Friday." I finished my week. I drove to Columbus on Friday. June was home by then, sitting in her recliner with a quilt over her lap, looking smaller than she had the last time I'd seen her, but sharp-eyed and direct as always. She held my hand for a long time without saying much. She said, "I want to talk to you about something." I said, "Okay." She said, "Not today, when I'm stronger, but soon." My mother was in the kitchen making tea. Walter was in the garage doing something with purpose. June looked at me the way she had looked at me my entire life, steady, long, worried, and said, "I've been waiting for the right time, Kara. I think the right time is running out." I didn't ask what she meant. I don't know why I didn't ask. Maybe because part of me had always known there was something to ask about, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. I drove home Sunday. I went back to school. I thought about what she'd said for 6 weeks. Then she had the second stroke, and it was not minor, and I drove back to Columbus, and I did not go home for a long time. Part 4. The woman in the chair. The hospital room had 2 windows and a view of a parking structure. June was in the bed with the steady rhythmic sound of the monitors keeping time. My mother was there and Walter, and 2 of the cousins. People rotated. People went to Called get me food. back on a Wednesday People afternoon. came back while I was On the walking 3rd home day, from I was school. there alone with He June said, for about an "Nora, hour in the early I've been afternoon. hoping you'd call." She was drifting. His voice was Not exactly what you'd unconscious, expect, but not quite present 70 either. years old. The way people Every are when their word body placed is like working furniture, hard on something he the rest said, of them can't "Your attend to." grandfather was very A woman specific knocked about on what the he open wanted door. for you. She was about "I want to make 45. sure it happens the way Dark he hair intended." going gray at the I temples. said, My
medium
mother said
height.
it was an
She was wearing
educational
a gray
fund.
coat and
Long
carrying a paper
pause.
cup of coffee.
He said,
and
Nora,
she stood
I
in the
think we
doorway
should
with the
meet.
look of someone
I
who had
told my
driven a
mother I
long
had a
way
study
and
group.
was not sure
I
of
took
their
the bus to
welcome.
Franklin
She
Marsh's
looked at
office
me.
on a Thursday in
I
March.
looked at her.
I wore my
She
good
said,
blouse
"Is
again.
this June
I
Alderman's
sat
room?"
across from him
I
at that
said,
dark wood
"Yes."
desk, and I
She
listened.
said, "I'm
What
I'm a
Grandpa
friend,
Pat had left
an
me
old
was
friend.
not an
I heard she
educational
was
fund.
ill. It was
I'm
a
sorry to
trust.
intrude.
Funded
She
with
didn't
the
look like she
proceeds
thought
from
she was
40 years
intruding.
of careful,
She
disciplined
looked like she
saving.
thought she had a
The
right to
sale of
be
his
there
accounting
and was
firm,
being careful
a
about
small
how she
commercial
used it.
property he'd
I
owned in
said, I'm her
Allentown.
granddaughter. Blue chip
Kara,
investments
the
he'd been
woman, went
quietly
very
tending since
still.
before my
She
father
looked
was
at me the
born.
way June
The
had
number
looked at
was
me my whole life.
$743,000.
Steady.
Franklin Marsh
Long.
wrote it on a
Something
legal
behind
pad
it
and
that I
slid
could
it
not
toward
yet
me the
name.
way you
She
hand
said,
someone a glass of
"Kara."
water. Just my name.
Carefully,
Like she was
watching
confirming
their
something.
face.
I said,
I looked
do
at
you
it for
want
a
to
long
sit down?
time.
She
I
sat in the
said,
chair
"My mother
beside the
said
bed.
educational
She
fund."
reached out and took
He
June's
said,
hand
"Your
with
mother
the ease of
attended the
someone who
reading.
had held
She
that
heard the
hand
same
before,
number many
I
times
said,
in other
what
rooms."
happens at 18?
He
June's
said,
eyes
"Full
opened.
beneficial
She
ownership
looked at the
transfers
woman.
to you.
Her face
Completely.
did something I had never seen
Irrevocably.
it do.
Your
A
grandfather
kind of
structured it
opening,
that way
a
on
relief.
purpose."
The
He
expression of
paused.
someone who has
He
been
was very
waiting for a
clear about the
specific person
purpose.
and had been
I
afraid
said,
they
"What
wouldn't
was
come
the
in
purpose?"
time. June
Franklin
said,
Marsh looked at
very
me over his
quietly,
glasses.
Ellen.
He said,
The
he
woman
said,
said,
"I don't
I'm here,
trust what
June.
happens
I'm
to that
here.
girl
I
after I'm
sat in the
gone.
other chair.
Make sure
I
she
did not
gets it
move.
herself."
I did not
Those were
speak.
his words.
I watched
Written
my
into the
grandmother hold the
instructions I
hand of a
keep in my
woman named
files.
Ellen with more ease
I
than I had
sat with
seen
her
her
for a
hold
minute.
anything in years.
The diplomas on the wall.
After a while,
The heavy
Ellen
frames.
looked at me.
The
She
hum of
said,
the office
she
building
talks
around
about
us.
you.
She
I
always
said,
has.
someone named Gary
said,
Holcomb has
"How
been
do you
coming
know
to
my
our house.
grandmother?" Franklin
Ellen
Marsh's
looked at
face
June,
did
who had
something
closed her eyes
slight,
again,
but
but
was
was squeezing
slight.
Ellen's
He
hand
said,
in a way
"I
that
know
looked
who
like
Gary
an answer.
Holcomb is."
She said,
He said it the
I
way
think
you'd
that's
say,
a
"I know what that
conversation
smell
for when
is."
June is stronger.
Flat recognition.
I said,
She
no
told me the
drama.
right time
He
was running
said,
out.
Nora,
A
I'd like
pause.
to propose something.
Ellen said, "I'd like to
Yes,
do what
she
your
told me the
grandfather
same
hired me
thing.
to do, which
We
is
sat
make
in that
sure
room
this
together
money
for
reaches
2
you the way
hours.
he
The
intended.
monitors kept
But I
their
need a little
time,
time
and I
outside
need you
the
to be
window.
patient,
Cars move
and I need
through the
you not to
parking
change
structure in
anything at
slow,
home.
patient loops.
I said,
By the
what do
time
you
my
mean,
mother
change
arrived and
anything?
stopped in the doorway
He
and
said,
saw
your
Ellen
face,
sitting in the chair
your
beside
schedule,
June's bed,
your
something
conversation.
irreversible had
Don't let
already
them know
begun.
you've been here.
My
I was
mother's
16
face
years
in that
old,
doorway,
sitting
was
in
the
a
most
lawyer's
honest
office,
I had ever
being
seen
told
it.
to keep my face
She
neutral.
said, "Ellen."
I thought of Grandpa
Ellen
Pat in his
said,
kitchen, saying
"Carol."
from me to you with
Two
nobody in
women who
between.
had known each other
I
for a
said,
long time.
okay.
Meeting in a
Part
room they
5,
had both
the
been trying
birthday
not to
dinner.
end up in
My
together.
mother planned a
I said,
surprise birthday
"Mom,
dinner for
who
Robert
is
in
she?"
late April.
My
His
mother's mouth
52nd,
opened. She booked
closed.
a private room at a restaurant
June,
called
from the bed,
Harrington's.
without opening
White
her eyes,
tablecloths,
said,
candles.
Tell her.
The kind of place where
Part
the menu
5.
doesn't have
What
prices
my mother
because
told
the
me,
kind
we
of
went to
people
the
who
family
eat there
waiting
don't
room down the
ask.
hall.
There were about
My mother
20
and
guests.
I.
Ellen
Robert's
stayed
girlfriends.
with June.
My
I
mother's
thought
book
about
club.
arguing,
Cody
and then I
and
thought that
Bryce
June
in
had
collared
chosen to have
shirts,
Ellen's
looking
hand
bored.
rather than mine
Me
in this
in a blue
moment.
dress that had
And that
since
choice was
sophomore
information
homecoming,
I needed
sitting
to sit
between
with.
my mother and a
My
woman
mother
named
held a
Patrice
styrofoam
who
cup
sold
of
real
coffee
estate
she didn't
and
drink.
talked
She
exclusively
told
about
me.
square footage.
In 2001,
Gary Holcomb
before I
was
was
there.
born, my
Of course
mother
he
and my
was.
father had been
Sitting
trying to
2
have a
tables
child
over
for
with
almost
his
2
wife.
years. He'd arrived
Nothing
early.
was happening.
He had the look of a
They saw
man
a
attending a
doctor.
business meeting
The
dressed
doctor
as a
had
birthday
findings.
party. My
Halfway
mother
through the main
specifically
course,
had a
a
condition
man that
came in
made
alone and
conception
was seated at the
unlikely.
small table
Not
near the
impossible,
window.
the doctor
He was maybe
said.
60.
Unlikely.
Gray at the
Unlikely
temples.
had a weight
He
to
was
it that my
wearing a dark
parents
suit
carried
that was
differently.
quiet in the way
My father,
expensive
she
things
said,
are
was
quiet.
patient.
He carried
said
a
they had
slim leather
time.
briefcase
He said
which
they
he
could
set
consider
against his
other
chair leg
options.
with the
He was
practiced
not
ease
the
of
one
someone
whose
who
body
carries
was the
one every
subject
day.
of the findings.
He ordered soup.
My mother
He
did not feel
unfolded his
patient.
napkin. My
He
mother
looked
was
around the room
27,
once,
watching
the way you
friends
look
announce
when you're checking you're in the
pregnancies,
right
attending
place.
showers, buying
His
small
eyes
soft
landed
things
on
for other
Gary
people's
Holcomb.
children. She was
Gary saw
27,
him,
and she wanted
Gary
a
went
family.
still still
and
in a
she was
specific
being
way.
told her body might
The
not
way people
cooperate
go
and nobody
still
could
when
say
they
for
weren't
certain.
expecting to be
And in the
seen.
meantime, there
The
was
man in
nothing
the
to
dark
do but
suit
wait.
gave Gary a
Her
small
sister
nod.
Patricia was
Not
24.
friendly.
Patricia was
Professional.
not trying to
The
have a
nod of
child.
someone communicating.
Patricia was working,
I see
living
you,
in Youngstown
and
and
we
making
both
her
know
way.
what that means.
Patricia was
Gary
also
looked
in the
away.
way of younger sisters
Under the
with older
table,
sisters
my
in
hand
crisis.
tightened on my
In the
napkin.
position of
I
trying to
watched
help.
the man eat
The
his
help
soup.
Patricia offered was
I
not a
watched
small
him take a
thing.
phone call.
It was the largest
Stepping
thing
just
one person
outside
can
the dining
offer
room.
another. One
I was
hand in
quiet
his
for a
pocket,
long time
the
after
other
my
holding
mother
the
told
phone
me.
at a precise
The
angle.
waiting room had
I
chairs
watched
bolted
him
to the
come
floor,
back, and a
I watched
television
him
on
glance
mute
at
and a
Robert
vending
when Robert
machine that
stood to
hummed.
make a toast.
I
The glance
said,
lasted 2
Patricia is my
seconds.
biological
It was the kind of
mother.
glance that was
My
actually a
mother
measurement.
said, yes.
At the end of the dinner,
I
when
said,
people were gathering
and
coats
Ellen,
and saying their goodbyes,
my mother
I
looked at her
walked past
cup.
the man's table
She
on my
said,
way to the
Ellen
restroom.
was Patricia's
He
partner.
looked up.
At the time,
He said quietly,
I said,
and without
at the
any
time.
particular drama.
She said, you
They
must be
separated
Nora.
when you were about 2.
I stopped.
Patricia
He
moved
said,
to Portland.
I'm sorry to do this here.
Ellen
I'm
stayed in
Franklin Marsh's
Ohio for a
colleague.
while.
My name
and
is
then
David
she
Riss.
moved.
I've been
Your
asked to
grandmother kept
verify
in
some
touch with
documents
Ellen.
that were filed
Your
this
grandmother
week in
never
Lehigh County.
entirely.
I needed to see
She
the
stopped.
principals in person.
She started again.
I said very
June
quietly.
always felt
What
that the way things
documents?
were handled
He
wasn't
said,
right.
A petition
She
for
disagreed
guardianship
with how your father
extension
and I decided to
filed by
handle
your
it.
mother.
I
It
said,
argues
how
that
did
due
you
to your
decide to handle
documented
it?
academic struggles,
She said,
you
we
require
told Patricia
guardian
that it
managed
had to be a
financial
clean break,
oversight structure
that if she
past
was
your
going to do
18th
this for
birthday.
us, it had
The
to be
room was loud
complete.
around us.
We said,
Someone was
we
laughing
said it
near
would
the
be
coat check.
confusing for you to have
Robert was
multiple
shaking
parents,
hands.
multiple
I said,
families.
I have a 3.8
We said it was better
GPA.
if you just knew
David
us.
Rice said,
I said,
know.
Does
That's
Patricia
why
know
I'm
about
here.
me?
Part
Now,
6.
does
What
she
they've
know
been
where I
building
am?
Franklin
What
Marsh
I'm
called
doing?
me the next
My
morning
mother
at
said,
7:30.
your grandmother
I
had
stepped
sent her
outside
updates,
onto the back porch in my socks. The April
photographs,
air was
a
sharp and
pause.
thin.
We
He
didn't
said,
explicitly,
David told me
we
he
didn't
spoke
ask
with
her
you.
to stop.
I'm sorry it happened
I
that
said,
way,
I
but
didn't
you didn't
plan
ask
it.
her to start
I said,
either.
tell me what they filed.
She said nothing.
He walked me
I
through
said,
it.
Mom,
Slowly.
I have been told my
The
whole
way you
life I
explain
was
a
an
map to
accident.
someone
She
standing
said
in the
very
middle of the
quietly,
territory it's
I
describing.
know. My
I know
mother
that's
and
what we
Gary
said.
Holcomb had
We
been
thought
working
it
with an
was.
attorney named
We thought it
Stephen
was
Pruitt
easier.
out of Bethlehem.
We thought if you understood
Pruitt
yourself as
specialized in what
unexpected
Franklin
but
called
wanted,
contested
you would never
estate
have a reason to look for an
which was a
explanation.
careful way of saying
We
he
thought.
helped families
She
redirect
stopped.
inheritances
I
before the
said, you
intended
thought if I
recipient
knew I
could
was
legally
planned, I
claim
might
them.
wonder who
The
had planned to
guardianship
give me
petition
away.
was step 1.
She looked at
If
the muted
granted,
television.
it would extend my
A
mother's
weatherman
legal
was
authority
gesturing
over
at a
my
map.
financial
The
decisions
sound was
until I
off.
turned 21.
The urgency of the
It would give
gesture
her the
without
right
the
to
voice
sign on
was
my
almost
behalf,
funny,
to
in the
direct
way
the trust
nothing is funny when you're
disbursements,
sitting
to
in a
essentially
hospital
stand
waiting
between
room
me
finding
and
out
Grandpa
who you
Pat's
are.
money for
She
3
said,
more years.
we made decisions
The
that were
petition
wrong.
cited 2
I know
things:
they were wrong.
academic performance,
I knew it before
which
today.
was fabricated,
I have
and
been,
emotional
I have been
instability,
carrying this
for which
19
they had submitted
years,
a letter
Kara.
from a therapist I
I
had seen
said,
once.
yeah.
At 14,
I said,
after my grandfather
so have
Pat
I.
died, when
I
my
just
mother
didn't
had
know what
taken
it
me for
was.
3 sessions and
Part
then decided
6,
I was
Ellen.
fine. I went back to
sat
June's
down
room.
on the porch step.
Ellen was
I
still
said,
there.
she used the
June
grief
was asleep,
counseling against
properly
me.
this time,
Her
Franklin
breathing
said.
even and slow.
The letter was taken out
Ellen
of
was
context,
sitting with her hands folded in her
significantly out of
lap,
context.
not on her phone,
The
not
therapist
doing
has
anything,
already been notified
just sitting
and
the
is
way
not
people
pleased.
sit when they are keeping a
I
vigil.
said, what do we
I
do?
sat in the
He
other
said.
chair.
We
I
file a
said,
response.
my mother
We file
told
it
me.
today.
And
Ellen
I want
nodded.
to do something else.
She didn't say I know
want to call
or
a
I'm
hearing
sorry
before your 18th
or any
birthday
of the things people
with
say
a guardian
when they're feeling
ad litem.
silence. An independent
She waited.
attorney appointed
I
to
said,
represent only
you were with Patricia
not
when
your
I was
mother.
born,
Not the
she
trust.
said.
I was in
You.
the hospital.
I said,
How long does
yes,
that take?
I was there.
He said,
I
6
said,
weeks if we move
what was
fast.
she like?
My
Is she
birthday was
like?
in 8 weeks.
Ellen looked at
I
me.
said, move
I
fast.
could see she was
Part
deciding
7,
something,
6
not
weeks
whether
I
to
went
lie.
home. I think
I
she
set
was
the
past
table
that.
for breakfast.
But how much?
I poured orange juice.
And in what order?
I sat across
She
from
said,
my mother,
she's
and
quiet.
I was the daughter
She
I had
thinks
always
before she
been in this
talks.
house.
She's a
Quiet,
landscape architect
present,
now.
unremarkable.
She lives in Portland.
She passed me the toast.
She has a garden that
She
takes
said,
up most of
did
her
you
yard
have fun
and
last
a dog
night?
named
I
something
said,
ridiculous
the
that I
food was
can't
good.
remember.
She
A
said,
pause. Gary was
she looks
asking
like
about
you.
Around
He's
the
really
eyes.
excited to help with the financial
I
planning
said,
when you turn
does she know I'm
18.
here?
I said,
In Columbus?
that's nice.
Ellen said.
She smiled.
She knows
She
June
touched
is
my
sick.
hand.
She
said,
knows I was
we just
coming.
want to make
She
sure
asked
you're
me
taken
to.
care of,
She
sweetheart.
asked me to
That's
tell you
all
something
any of this is.
if I had the chance. I said,
I
know,
know,
tell
Mom.
me. She had
Ellen
no idea
unfolded her
I'd spoken
hands.
to David Riss
She
the
looked
night
at them for a
before.
moment.
She had
She
no
said,
idea Franklin March had filed
tell
a
her it was
response to
never
her
because she
petition at
wasn't
9 a.m.
wanted
that morning.
Tell her she was the
She had
most
no
wanted
idea
thing
that in
I
6
was
weeks
ever involved
there was going
in.
to be a hearing.
Tell her I
and that
thought
a
about
woman
her
named
every
Judge
year
Carol
on her
Hess in
birthday.
Lehigh County
Tell her
was
I
going to read a
understand if she
petition
never
built
wants
on a
to know me.
fabricated
Tell her I
transcript
would like
and
to
a
know her if she
misrepresented
does.
therapy letter.
The
and that it
monitors
was
kept
going to
their
go
time.
badly for the people who
June's
filed
breathing
it.
was slow
I
and
kept
even.
my face even.
I said,
I did
"How
my
long have you been
homework.
carrying
I
that?"
went to school.
Ellen said.
I did not tell my
4
friends.
hours.
I did not write
Since
it
I
in
got
my
in the
journal,
car this morning,
which I
I
started
said,
keeping
"That's
in
a
a
long
locker
drive
at
to carry
school instead
something,"
of a
she
chemistry
said, "worth
textbook.
every mile."
I called
Part
Franklin
7.
every Wednesday
What the
at
family
4.
thought I am going to be
Short
precise
calls,
about what
status
happened next.
updates,
Because
he
the
was
details
patient.
matter.
He had the voice
My
of
mother
someone
called
who
my
had done
father
this
from the waiting
before.
room. I
Not
was
this
not in the room for
exactly.
that call.
The general
I
shape
heard
of
about
this.
it afterward from my
People who were
father,
supposed
who
to
drove
receive
to
things
Columbus
and
were
that
being
evening,
maneuvered
and
away
sat
from
across
them
from
and
me at
needed
a
someone to
restaurant
hold
near
the
the
legal
hospital,
line while they
and
waited.
told me his
Week
version
3,
with his
he
hands
told me
flat on the
Stephen
table
Pruitt
and
had
his
withdrawn
voice
from the
steady
case.
in the way
He
it
didn't say
gets when
why.
he is being
He
very
didn't have
careful.
to.
Attorneys
He said,
withdraw for
"We
reasons.
thought we were protecting
Those
you."
reasons often
I
involve not
said,
wanting
"I
their
know."
bar number associated with a document
"I want
built
you
on
to know it wasn't
fabricated
about being
academic
ashamed of
records.
how you were born."
Week 4,
We
the Guardian
weren't.
ad
We were
litem was
grateful.
appointed. We were
Her
more
name
grateful
was
than I know
Sandra
how to
Cole.
say. She called
I
me on a
said,
Tuesday
"Then why the
evening.
accident story?"
She said,
"Nora,
he said, I've been
because we were
appointed to
afraid that if
represent
you
your
knew the
interests
truth,
in
you'd
this
think you had
proceeding.
been."
I want you
He
to know that
stopped.
means your
He
interests.
started again.
Not your
"We
family's.
were afraid you'd
Not
think you
the
had been
estate's.
passed along.
Yours.
Like something
I
that
said,
didn't fit where it was
okay.
supposed
She
to
said,
go.
I've read
We
the
wanted you to
petition.
feel
I've
like you had
read your
always been
academic
ours.
record. I have some
I
questions.
said, "Dad."
I said,
I've always
ask
felt like
whatever you
yours.
need.
That
We talked
wasn't
for
the
an
part
hour
that
and
needed
20
managing.
minutes. He
At
looked
the
at the
end,
table.
she said,
Nora,
I said,
your
"The part
grandfather
that
was a
needed
very
managing
careful
was
man."
the truth."
I said,
And it
he
managed
was.
itself without your
She
help.
said, he was
It just
careful
took
about you
19
specifically.
years.
I can see it
He
in how this
cried.
trust was
He doesn't
written.
cry often.
I said,
He cried
used
the way
to say
he had
wanted to
apparently
make
cried
sure
at
it
his
got
own
to me
wedding,
the right way,
quietly and with
Sandra
the look of a
Cole
man
was
who had
quiet
been
for a
surprised
moment.
by his own feelings.
Then she said,
I handed him a
will.
napkin. He
Part
took
8.
it. We
The
sat
hearing,
there.
the hearing
He
was on a
said,
Thursday
"What are you
morning
going
in
to
June.
do?"
Courtroom
I said,
4B
"I'm going to
in
finish
Lehigh
being
County.
here for June."
Wood paneling.
And then I'm going
fluorescent
to think.
lights.
The cousins
The
found
smell of
out
carpet
because
that had been
families find
cleaned
out.
many times
I don't know
without ever
exactly
getting
how
clean.
or through whom.
My mother arrived
The
with an
way
attorney I
information
didn't
moves
recognize.
through a family
Young,
is its own kind of
expensive
weather.
suit.
You don't see it coming.
He had the look of
You
someone
just
who'd been
find
hired
yourself
fast.
in it. By
Robert
the end of
sat
the
in the
week,
gallery.
6
Cody
cousins,
and Bryce
3 aunts,
did not come.
2 uncles,
Gary
and a great
Holcomb
aunt
was
who
not
was
there.
91 and
Gary
had opinions
Holcomb
about
was,
everything
Franklin
new.
later told
That
me,
Cara
dealing with a
Sinclair was
separate
not
complaint
Carol
filed
and
with the
Dennis
Pennsylvania
Sinclair's
Department of Banking and
biological
Securities
child.
regarding
The
his
reactions
advisory
were
practices.
various.
He was going to
One
be
aunt
occupied
cried
and
and
then
then
apologized
apologized
for crying,
Sandra
which was
Cole
kind.
sat beside
One
me as
cousin
in
said that
Sandrick's
explains
table.
so much,
She
and
smelled
then
like
immediately
coffee
regretted
and had a
saying
yellow
it,
legal
which I
pad with
appreciated
very
for its
small
honesty.
writing all over it.
One uncle went
Judge
quiet
Hess
in the way
was
of people
60,
who are
silver
recalibrating
hair,
all their previous memories
reading glasses
and need a
on a
moment for
chain.
the math. She had the
The great aunt
expression of
said,
someone who
"Well,
had seen
Carol
a great
always
number of
did
documents
manage everything,"
and was not
which was
impressed
the
by
most
any
accurate
of them.
thing anyone
My
said
mother's
all
attorney
week.
went first.
Nobody
He
was
spoke for
cruel.
12 minutes.
I want to be clear
He
about
used
that.
phrases like protective
Nobody said
oversight
anything
and
that was
family-centered
intended to
approach
wound.
and
What
developmental
I felt in that week
considerations.
was not
Then
hostility
Sandra
from my
Cole stood
family.
up. What I
She
felt
went through the
was
academic
the specific
record, my
vibration
actual
of a secret
academic
releasing.
record.
3.8
The way a room sounds
GPA.
different after a
3
window
AP
has been
classes.
opened. Even if
Honor
you can't
roll
quite say
citation.
how. 2
Part
consecutive
8.
years.
June
She placed the
lived for
documents
another
in front
6
of the
weeks
judge
after
one
that
at a
week in the
time.
hospital.
Slowly,
She
she
came
said,
home.
"The petition
She sat in her
characterizes
recliner
Nora
with the quilt.
Callahan as
She was
academically
slower and
struggling,
quieter, but she was
I'd like to
there
ask
and
the
she
court
was
to
herself.
reconcile that
I drove to
characterization
Columbus
with the
3 more
documents I've
times
just
before
submitted.
she died.
My mother's
We
attorney
talked.
said,
Real
"These are
talking.
complex
The kind we had been
developmental
doing my whole life,
determinations,
but which had a
Judge
different
Hess
quality
said,
now that the
counsel,
thing she'd been
just
waiting
the
to tell
word,
me was
like
no
a
longer
handheld
between
up."
us.
Then Sandra
She said,
Cole
I
addressed
should
the
have pushed
therapy
harder.
letter.
Earlier.
She had a signed
I
statement
said,
from
you
the
said what you
therapist,
could say.
a Dr. Alicia
She
Ben,
said, I let your
clarifying
mother
the
have her way
context and
because
scope
she
of
was
the
my
sessions,
daughter and she
and
was in
explicitly
pain.
stating
And
that
I thought I
nothing
was
in
helping.
those sessions supported
I
the
told myself
conclusions
the
drawn
truth
in the
would keep.
petition.
She looked at her
Dr. Ben's
hands.
statement
The
used the
truth
phrase
keeps, Cara, but it
misrepresentation
keeps
of
in
clinical
you.
documentation.
It doesn't disappear.
She used it twice.
It lives in you,
Judge
and it
Hess
makes you
read the
into a
statement.
particular shape.
She read it
And
twice
then one
also.
day, you find out
She
what
looked
shape
up.
you've been living in,
She said,
and you realize it
Fenn,
wasn't your own.
is your
I
daughter's
said,
inheritance the
I don't know
subject
what
of this
shape I'm in
petition?
yet. My
She
mother's
said,
attorney started
"Yes,
to
you
object.
do.
Judge
You've always
Hess
did
did
not
not
look
look
at
at
him.
shape.
That's what
My
I've been
mother
watching
said,
for 20
we're
years.
just trying
You
to
were
protect
always
her.
entirely
Judge
yourself."
Hess said, the
From
story
what,
they gave you couldn't
specifically?
change that. Silence.
I said, "Grandma, The fluorescent
she
lights
said.
hummed.
I'm just telling
Somewhere
you
in the
what I
building,
saw.
a door closed.
She died
My
on a
mother
Tuesday
said,
in November.
from making decisions
Peacefully,
she's not
in
ready
her
for.
own bed.
Which
Judge
she
Hess
also
looked down
would
at
have
her
considered the
papers.
only
She looked up
acceptable way to
again.
go.
She said, I
The
was
petition
there.
is denied.
I held her hand.
Court costs are
I said I
assessed
got
to the
it, June.
petitioner.
I'm
I
referring the
understand.
academic record
Whether she heard
discrepancy
me,
to the
I
county
don't know.
clerk for review.
I believe she did.
She took her
Part
glasses
9.
off.
Patricia.
She looked
I
at me
waited until
directly for the
January.
first time.
I needed fall
She
and its
said,
particular
Miss
grief to
Callahan,
pass.
happy early
I
birthday.
needed the holidays
I
to
said,
pass,
thank
which
you,
they
Your
did,
Honor.
strangely, almost
Part
normally.
9. My
What
family
came after
gathering
my
around
18th
tables
birthday
and eating and
was
talking
quiet,
and being careful with each other
intentionally
in the slightly
quiet.
new way
I was
families
done
are
with
careful
rooms
when a
full of
truth
people
has
who thought
recently
they
been
were celebrating
rearranged.
me.
My mother and I
Franklin
were not
marched
keen
into
to
his
with each
office
other.
on a Saturday.
We were working
which he
on
said
it.
he never did.
That's the
and
most
walked me
honest
through
way
the
I
trust
know to say
documents
it.
across that dark
She
wood
had made
desk.
choices that were
He
wrong
used
and
small
she
words.
knew it.
and
He
I
wrote
knew it.
terms on the
And
legal
we were
pad.
both trying to
He was
figure out what
patient
you
in the
do
way
with
of a
that when
man
you
who had
love
been waiting
someone.
to do
And the
this
love
for a
is
long
real,
time,
and the wrong
and
is
was
also
glad to
real,
finally
and
be
neither
doing it.
cancels the
The
other out.
trust transferred
I
into my
called
sole
Patricia in
ownership at
January
midnight on my
a
birthday.
Tuesday evening.
My apartment, the window
$743,000,
that faced
grown
the
in the
parking
years
lot,
since
a
Grandpa
cup of
Pat's
tea
death
going
to
cold on the
76 to
counter. She answered on the second
$1,842.
ring.
Well
She
managed.
said, carefully
Kara?
tended.
I said,
The way
yes.
Grandpa Pat did
She
everything.
said, I'm so
Franklin
glad you
said,
called.
your
Her
grandfather
voice.
chose me
I had
because
thought
he
about
knew
what it would
I'd
sound
wait
like.
as long as it took.
I had not
I
anticipated
said,
the
how
specific
long have
way
you
it
been
would
doing
land.
this? Familiar
He said,
and foreign at
holding?
once. The way
Since
a
your
place
mother
looks
came
in
to
a
that
dream
first
when you
reading,
recognize it,
and
I
know
knew
you've
the
never
minute she
actually
said us
been
what we
there.
were dealing with.
We talked for 2
I
hours.
looked at him across the
She
desk.
told me about Portland.
I said, you've
the
been watching
garden,
out for
the
this for
dog
2
whose
years.
name turned out to
He
be
said,
Rutherford,
your
which
grandfather
explained
asked
why
me to.
Ellen couldn't
I said
remember
yes.
it.
It
She
was the
told me
easiest
about being
yes I've said in
24
40
and being
years of
afraid and
practice.
loving my mother and
I
wanting to
cried
help
then,
and not
fully
loudly,
understanding what
just
help
the
would
kind of
cost her,
crying that
until it had
happens when
already been
something you've been
spent.
holding for a
She
long
said,
time
I
finally
don't want
gets
you to
set
feel
down.
like you have to
Franklin
forgive me.
slid the box
I
of
said,
tissues across
I
his
don't think
desk with the
forgiveness is the
efficiency
right
of someone
word
who
for what I'm
kept them
trying to
there
do.
for exactly this.
She said,
He
what's
said,
the right
take your
word?
time.
I
Robert
thought
and
about
my
it.
mother's marriage
I
did not
said,
survive the summer.
understanding
It
maybe.
wasn't dramatic.
It
I
was
want
practical.
to understand what
The
happened,
legal fees
not
from
just
the hearing,
facts,
the complaint
inside
against
of
Gary
it.
Holcomb.
She was
The way
quiet for a
Robert's
moment.
business partners
She
quietly
said,
started
the
returning his
inside of it
calls
was
with
that
a
I loved
slightly
you
longer
before you
delay
were
than
born.
before.
I
Things
loved the idea
unravel
of
in
you.
small ways
And
before
then
they
you were
unravel
real
all
and you
the
were the
way.
small
By
particular
August,
person, and I was
Robert had moved
24
into an
and
extended
terrified,
stay
and your
hotel
mother
near his
needed you in
office.
a way I
My
had
mother
never
kept
seen
the
her need
house.
anything.
And
She
I
also
told
kept
myself
the
that
second
love
mortgage
looked like
they'd
stepping
taken out
back,
in March,
which Robert had told her was
I
for
have
a
not
business
always been
expansion,
sure I was right,
and which was
I
actually
said,
partly
were
for
you?
Stephen Pruitt's
Long
retainer.
silence.
Cody
She
and
said,
Bryce
I
went
think
back
you
to their
turned out
mother's
who you
house.
are because of your
They didn't
parents
say
and
goodbye
because
to
of
me.
yourself.
That was fine.
I don't think stepping
We
back
had
was
never said
wrong.
much to each other
I think
anyway.
the silence was wrong.
My mother
The
texted
story
me
they
in
told
September.
you was wrong.
The
You
first
deserved
text
the
said,
truth.
I
I
hope
said,
you're settling
yes,
in okay.
I did.
I was
She
by
said,
then
I'm
settled
sorry
into
you
a
didn't
dorm
have
room
it.
at Temple
I said,
University
I
in
have it now.
Philadelphia.
Epilogue.
My roommate was
What I
named
know now,
Jess.
spring.
She was studying
Early enough that the
environmental
trees
science
haven't committed
and
to
had a
anything
small
yet.
succulent
I am
collection on the
22.
windowsill.
I am
And never
finishing my
once
junior
asked me
year.
to be
I
smaller
am
than I
sitting in a
was.
coffee shop 2
I
blocks
didn't
from
answer my
campus with
mother's
a notebook
text.
open that I am
Not
not
that
writing
day.
in because I am
I
thinking
thought about
instead.
answering it for a
I have
long
met
time.
Patricia twice
Part
in
10.
person.
The
Both
thing
times
about
in
Grandpa
Columbus.
Pat
Neutral
October.
ground.
A
A
coffee shop
Saturday.
not unlike this one.
I was at the library.
She brought
Fourth
photographs of the
floor,
garden.
window seat.
I
When I
brought
took out my
photographs of
phone
June,
and looked at
which
my
she
mother's
cried
text
over,
again,
which I expected
11
and had
texts
prepared
now,
for by also
ranging
bringing
from
tissues.
I hope you're okay
We are not
to
yet,
I made
whatever we will
mistakes,
eventually
and I
be
know
to
that
each
to
other.
one that said simply,
We are in the
I miss you
process
with
of
no
becoming
punctuation.
it. That
which
is
felt
enough.
the most honest
That
of
is,
all of
I
them.
think, more
I
than
thought
enough.
about Grandpa
My
Pat,
mother and I
about
talk
what
on
he would
Sundays.
say.
She
He was
called
not a
first
vengeful
every
person.
week. He was
For
a
2
careful
months before I
person.
started calling
There is a
first
difference.
sometimes.
Vengeance
That felt like
requires
the right
energy.
pace.
Care
She is
requires
not the same with
attention.
me as she was
He had paid
before
attention
November.
to what was
Neither
happening
am I.
around me.
I
And he
don't
had
think
taken
we'll get back
steps,
to what we were.
and he had trusted
I think
Franklin
we're
Marsh,
building something
and he had
adjacent
trusted
to
me
it that
to
has more
eventually
air
make
in
the
it.
call.
My father
He had
emails
not
me
asked me
articles
to
he
be
thinks I'll
hard.
like
He'd
and
asked
adds
me to
nothing
be
in the body
protected.
of the email
I thought
except the
about
link,
Judge Hess saying
which is
from
his
what
love
specifically,
language and always
I thought
has
about the
been.
fluorescent
That
lights.
has not changed.
I thought about Sandra
I am
Cole's
glad it
yellow
has not
legal pad
changed.
with a very small
Here
writing.
is what I have been thinking
I
about.
thought about the way
In
my
this
mother
coffee
had
shop,
squeezed
with
my
the
hand
notebook
the morning
open,
of Robert's
I was
birthday
told I
party
was
and
an
told me
accident.
she
I
wanted me
believed
to be
it.
taken care
I
of.
built myself
I think
around
she
it,
believed it.
not in a damaged
I
way,
think she
I don't
believed
think,
that what she
but
wanted
in the
for me
particular
and what
way
she
of a
wanted for
person who has
herself
been
were
given
the
a
same
story
thing.
about their own
I think
origin
that's the
and
most
fit themselves
complicated
to it
part.
without
I
realizing
wrote
that's
back,
what they're
I'm
doing.
okay.
I
I'm
thought
in
the accident
Philadelphia.
story meant I
I
was
needed
unplanned,
time.
unexpected.
She wrote back
a
within
lucky
a minute.
surprise.
I know.
The truth was
Take
different.
whatever you need.
The truth was
I
that I
put
was
my
the
phone
most planned
face down
thing
in
in
the
the library
room.
table. That two women,
Outside
my
the
mother
window,
and my aunt,
leaves were
had
coming
sat
down in
across from
slow,
each other in
even
someone's
spirals.
kitchen and made a
The
decision
kind of
about
October
me before
afternoon
I
that feels
existed.
like it was
That the
designed for
decision
exactly
came
the
from
kind of
love
moment
on
you're
both
having.
sides.
I thought
Whatever its
Grandpa
cost.
Pat would have liked it
That my
here.
grandmother
He
had
would have
watched
liked
me
the
for
library.
19 years.
He would have
with
found
that
a seat by
steady,
a different
worried look,
window and
because
taken
she knew
notes
the
on a
shape
legal
of the
pad.
real story.
I thought
and could
he
see
would
where
have
it
said,
didn't quite match
"Nora,
the shape
the
I'd
money
been
is not the
given.
point.
I was
The
not
money
an
is just the
accident.
proof that
I
someone
was the
loved you
most
carefully."
deliberate thing some people had
Epilogue.
ever done.
1 year later.
That is a different
April.
thing to build yourself
A
around.
Saturday.
My
I am
19th
still building.
birthday.
I
I
am
don't
sitting in
expect
the
to finish
same
soon.
library, different
That's
floor,
fine.
bigger window.
I have time, and I
Franklin
have the
Marsh
real story
emailed me
now,
this
and
morning.
I have a
The
grandmother
subject
who made
line
an
said annual
extraordinary
statement.
choice to wait
The
until
body
I was
said,
ready.
"Trust
And a
value
woman
as
in
of April
Portland with a
1st,
garden and a dog named Rutherford who thinks about me every year
$708.00.
on my birthday
Everything
and
is
is
in
working
order.
up to saying
Happy
more
birthday,
about it.
Nora.
Your
The family
grandfather would
knows
be
now.
very proud.
All of it.
I wrote
The
back.
furniture
Thank
has
you
been
for everything.
rearranged.
He wrote
Some
back.
people are still
Thank you,
figuring out
grandfather.
where to sit.
I just answered the phone.
But the window
I
is
have
open.
a coffee.
That's
I
the
have an
difference.
organic chemistry
That's the
textbook
whole difference.
I am ignoring.
If you
I
made
have a
it this
pre-law
far,
club meeting at 2
thank
o'clock
you.
with 7
I
other
know
people
some of
who
you
all talk
recognize
too
something
fast
in
and want
this,
to
the
change
story
things
you
and
were given
remind
about
me
yourself,
every week
that
that the
gap
world
between
has
it and
laws in it
something you
for a
could feel
reason.
but couldn't name.
I have my mother's
Drop
number
one
in my
word in the
phone.
comments.
We have spoken 3
One
times
word for
since
what it
September.
felt like when you
Short
found out the story
conversations.
wasn't the whole story.
Careful. I read every
Like
one.
two people
I
figuring
answer
out
what I
whether there's
can.
still a road
There's
there.
another video
There
linked
might
below.
be.
I don't
It's
know
about
yet.
the conversation I
I'm
had
not in
with
a hurry
Patricia
to
the
find
second
out
time we
what
met.
I know.